Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Naomi Ellis remembered the exact moment her world broke in two. She had just returned from a late class at Berkeley Law, still in her oversized hoodie and jeans, when her phone buzzed with a dozen missed calls and texts. Most were from friends. Some were from classmates. A few were from people she hadn't heard from since high school. The subject was the same in all of them. "Isn't that your husband on TV?" She sat frozen on the couch in their one-bedroom apartment, the TV remote heavy in her hand. Her stomach turned even before she flipped the channel. The show was live, Mornings with Maddie, a talk show known more for fluff than fact. And there he was, Marcus Lorne, her husband of 4 years. Charismatic, confident, wearing the navy suit she had helped pick out the night before. Smiling like he had nothing to hide. "Are you married?" Maddie asked, teasing. Marcus chuckled, leaned forward, and said smoothly into the camera, "Nope. Too focused on the company right now. Relationships are a distraction." The studio audience laughed. Maddie playfully swooned. Naomi stared at the screen as if it had betrayed her too. She didn't cry. Not then. Not even when he came home 2 hours later with his phone off. No explanation, acting like it was nothing. "It's just PR," Marcus said, brushing past her as he threw his keys into the bowl by the door. "They like the eligible CEO angle. It's harmless." "You lied," Naomi said, her voice brittle. "I negotiated." "That's what you do when the stakes are high." Those were his last words before she left. She didn't pack much, just the essentials and her laptop. She didn't ask for an apology. She didn't even slam the door. She just walked out of the life they'd built together and never looked back. Or at least not until 8 years later. Naomi hadn't planned to end up on the bench. She started with public defense, moved to civil litigation, and eventually found her calling in white-collar crime cases, where manipulation wore suits and smiles, not ski masks. The day she was sworn in as a judge, she stood in front of the mirror in her chambers and saw someone unrecognizable. She was no longer the woman who once cooked dinner for Marcus in a cheap apartment while reviewing case law on her laptop. She was stronger now, sharper, and much harder to fool. It was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again. The case landed on her docket in the middle of a rainy Tuesday. She skimmed the folder absently until her eyes caught the name, Marcus Lorne, defendant. Her heart hiccuped. Then she read the charges: embezzlement, securities fraud, falsifying financial documents, and her blood turned to ice. He had done it all, alone. There were no co-conspirators, no scapegoats. The SEC had tracked missing investor funds from his startup, Lorne Tech, to personal offshore accounts in his name. The case was airtight, and now he was back. Not on TV, not in his corner office, but in her courtroom. The first day of trial drew a crowd. Marcus walked in wearing a tailored gray suit and that same disarming smile he'd once worn on television. His hair was grayer, his jaw a little more clenched, but he still carried himself like the room belonged to him. When he saw Naomi on the bench, his step faltered, just slightly, but she saw it. He tried to speak during a recess. She stopped him with a single look. "This is not a reunion, Mr. Lorne," she said coolly. "This is a federal courtroom. Keep your statements for your counsel." And so he did. But the courtroom felt like a volcano, quiet but always on the edge of eruption. Naomi reviewed evidence with cold precision. Emails with falsified data. Bank statements that didn't match ledger entries. Investor testimonies of being misled. But what struck her most were the details he never bothered to hide. Like he thought no one would look. Like he thought he was too smart to get caught. Maybe he had been. Till now. In the hallway after court, she overheard whispers. Reporters speculating. Former colleagues gossiping. "Did you hear she used to be married to him? No way. That's the judge. She's gonna eat him alive." Naomi ignored it all. She was not here for revenge. She was here for the truth. But the truth had a way of bleeding through no matter how many walls you built. One night, back in chambers, she stayed late reviewing footage from Marcus's investor presentations. Something caught her attention. A subtle switch in language, just before he launched a new funding round. He went from saying "we've achieved" to "I've created." The shift was small, but it echoed something he used to say when they fought. "I made this company. You just tagged along." Naomi shut the laptop slowly. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been. For Marcus, the lies were about control, image, power. And she had once been a prop in that image. Shadow. A silent partner he could erase with a soundbite. Not anymore. When Marcus took the stand, his attorney advised against it. But Marcus couldn't resist. He thought he could charm the jury the same way he charmed interviewers. He leaned forward, calm and practiced. "I regret some financial decisions," he said. "But embezzlement, that's a stretch." Naomi watched him coolly. "Please clarify for the court, Mr. Lorne. Do you dispute that the funds were transferred into accounts under your name? They were business reallocations, temporary moves. And do you have documentation of board approval?" He hesitated. "It was verbal." Naomi tilted her head. "And all verbal approvals came from?" He looked down. "Me." She let the silence settle. "No further questions," she said. The defense lawyer looked panicked. The jury alert. Marcus still believed he could talk his way out of anything. But Naomi knew better. And soon so would everyone else. Naomi Ellis sat at the bench with a stony expression, her gavel resting like a loaded pistol beside her hand. She'd presided over dozens of cases by now, some with bigger names, some with more money involved, but none had ever wrapped around her ribs like this one. None had clawed up from the pit of her past and demanded her full attention like Marcus Lorne. And Marcus was unraveling. Despite his carefully crafted composure, Naomi could see the cracks forming every time he was forced to listen as prosecutors read out the emails he thought he'd deleted. The offshore wire transfers he never expected anyone to trace. The lists of shell corporations, some with laughably obvious names, that he'd funneled money through for years. Naomi didn't allow herself to feel satisfaction. This was justice, not revenge. Still, when Marcus avoided her gaze as his defense scrambled to clean up his testimony, she didn't look away. The courtroom audience was shifting. Reporters who once worshipped Marcus's success story now scribbled with glee as his empire crumbled in front of them. Investors filled the back rows like ghosts, watching the man who promised them wealth try to spin his way out of prison. And yet Marcus still thought he could win. During a lunch recess on the third day, Naomi stood alone in her chambers, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. She stared at a photo she kept tucked beneath a folder, one nobody else had ever seen. It was from their wedding. Small, simple, taken in a park in Santa Barbara. Marcus had worn a wrinkled blazer. She'd carried daisies. They looked happy. But the happiness had been short-lived, hadn't it? Even then, he had referred to her achievements as cute. Even then, he downplayed her acceptance into Berkeley Law. Even then, the seeds of superiority had been planted. He needed to be the star. And she was just another supporting role, until she decided to write her own script. Naomi slid the photo back into the folder and pressed her fingers to her temples. She wouldn't let that version of her cloud what needed to happen now. The prosecution called its final witness the next morning, a forensic accountant named Miriam Chen. Calm, analytical, and devastatingly precise, Miriam walked the jury through the timeline of Marcus's financial manipulation with surgical clarity. Over $18.6 million was misappropriated over the course of 4 years, Miriam said. Every one of those transfers led to personal expenditures, luxury property, offshore investments, and cash reserves accessible only by the defendant. The courtroom was still. Even Marcus's defense attorney looked deflated. But Marcus smirked. When court adjourned for the day, he requested to speak with the judge privately. Naomi refused. The next morning, however, he pulled something unexpected. As his defense rested its case, Marcus requested to deliver a personal statement to the court before closing arguments. The request wasn't unusual. The court permitted it. But Naomi's gut warned her. He was going to use the stage. Marcus stood at the center of the courtroom like it was his stage. His audience finally captive. His voice was smooth, the way it always had been. "I've made mistakes," he began, glancing at the jury, then at Naomi. "I lost my way. But I never intended to hurt anyone. I started with a dream, building something out of nothing. And I did it. I built Lorntech with my own 2 hands." He paused for dramatic effect. "I never took a dime I didn't believe I could return. I didn't steal. I survived. And if I'm guilty of anything, it's believing too much in myself." Naomi blinked once, then twice. The words were pure manipulation, crafted not just for the jury but for the cameras, the gallery, the headlines. And then he said it. "I've been punished before for putting ambition ahead of relationships. Years ago, I made a personal mistake that cost me someone important. And I paid the price. But this trial, this is not justice. This is overreach." The courtroom buzzed. Naomi leaned forward, her voice sharp. "That will be enough, Mr. Lorne. Return to your seat." Marcus hesitated just half a second too long. The bailiff stepped forward. He sat. But the damage had been done. His statement, veiled, self-aggrandizing, was clearly meant to cast suspicion on her. Naomi's voice never cracked. Her instructions to the jury remained firm. But inside, her spine burned. Outside the courthouse that evening, a group of paparazzi waited. Naomi walked past them briskly, but one called out, "Judge Ellis, is it true you were married to Marcus Lorne?" She didn't stop walking. Another reporter shouted, "How can you stay impartial when you used to be his wife?" That one stung. She closed the car door behind her and drove in silence through the winding hills of San Francisco. She had worked too hard, climbed too high, sacrificed too much, to have this trial reduce her back to his shadow. At home, she opened her laptop and pulled up the public ethics complaint site. There were already a few anonymous submissions, suspiciously similar in tone, questioning her involvement in the case. She suspected Marcus himself had seeded them. He always played the long game. The final day of trial arrived. Naomi wore black. No jewelry. Her hair pinned up like a helmet. Her voice rang clear and firm through the final instructions to the jury. They deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was packed. The foreperson rose, hands steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Lorne, guilty on all counts." Some cries. Reporters scrambling. Marcus's jaw clenched. For the first time he looked small. The bailiff stepped forward. Marcus didn't resist. Naomi read the formal sentencing date and adjourned court. Her gavel landed like thunder. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, Naomi received a letter. Hand-delivered. It was from Marcus. "Naomi, congratulations. You won. You always were good at following rules. But you and I both know rules are made by people like me. And you'll always be the one cleaning up the mess. Enjoy your bench. I'll be appealing." She read it twice, then fed it into the shredder. Her hands didn't shake. What he didn't understand was this. She hadn't won by putting him in prison. She had won the moment she stopped needing his approval. The courtroom was quiet. The kind of quiet that made sound itself feel disrespectful. Marcus Lorne stood in his charcoal prison-issued suit, wrists uncuffed for the sentencing hearing but still tethered by arrogance. His smile was gone now. In its place was the mask of a man who realized that confidence had an expiration date, and his had spoiled. Naomi Ellis sat above him, elevated by the bench and by everything she'd become. Her robe hung neatly. Her voice was steady. But inside her chest, a quiet storm brewed. Not of vengeance, but of finality. This was the last time she'd ever have to see him, hear him, share a room with the man who once made her feel invisible so he could shine brighter. The sentencing phase had begun. The prosecution recommended 25 years. citing the scope of fraud, lack of remorse, and the damage done to investors. They played video after video of Marcus misleading people, shaking hands with hopeful entrepreneurs, promising returns, pretending everything was thriving while he siphoned funds into his personal haven. The defense begged for leniency. "Mr. Lorne is a first-time offender," his lawyer said. "He has already suffered significant reputational harm and personal loss." Naomi almost laughed. Personal loss. He only mourned what couldn't be spun into PR. Then Marcus asked to speak. She allowed it. He stood, clearing his throat like a man still trying to charm fate. "Your Honor," he began, "I know we've crossed paths before. I've made decisions that cost me everything. But I'm not a monster. I built a company from scratch. Created jobs. I made people believe." Naomi interrupted, calm and clinical. "Mr. Lorne, this is not the time to relitigate your self-image. If you have a statement, make it." His smile twitched. "I just think everyone makes mistakes. And some of us, well, we get crucified for it." Naomi closed the folder before her. "Thank you, Mr. Lorne. Please be seated." She looked at him for a long moment before she spoke. Not as a woman scorned, but as a judge who had heard enough lies to recognize when someone truly didn't think they'd done anything wrong. "In this court, we do not crucify people for mistakes," Naomi began. "We hold people accountable for choices. You, Mr. Lorne, did not make a single misstep. You made hundreds. You stole millions. You lied to investors. You falsified documents. You redirected funds meant for growth and innovation into lavish luxuries for yourself." She paused, letting the words hang. "But the most troubling thing is that even now, after all the evidence, all the testimony, you still think you're the smartest person in the room." A hush fell over the gallery. "This is not about a failed startup. It's about deliberate deceit. And while you used to control the narrative, here in this courtroom, truth matters more than image." She picked up the gavel. Her tone remained composed. "For the crimes of embezzlement, wire fraud, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice, this court sentences you to 22 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 18. Marcus's shoulders finally sagged. It was done. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, shouting questions. Naomi didn't answer them. Inside, she returned to her chambers and locked the door behind her. Her robe dropped onto the chair. Her breath finally released. She didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. What she felt was clean. That weekend, she took a trip alone to Santa Barbara. She visited the park where she and Marcus had married all those years ago. The bench they sat on was still there, weathered but steady. She sat. Few kids played in the distance. Somewhere nearby, a musician played soft acoustic guitar. Naomi closed her eyes. She remembered the way she used to look at Marcus like he held the future in his hands. But the truth was, he'd never held her with the same care she gave him. She had built her future without him. And in the end, she hadn't needed a courtroom to prove her worth. Months passed. Marcus's name faded from the headlines. Naomi presided over new cases, read new files, studied new faces. But one morning, her clerk handed her an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a small blurb, buried in the back pages of a business magazine. Lorne Tech assets liquidated in auction. All remaining funds redirected per court order to investors and employee severance packages. Former CEO Marcus Lorne's appeal was officially denied. Attached was a sticky note. No signature. Just 5 handwritten words. "You were always the smart one." She stared at the note for a while. Then she lit a match and watched it burn. Naomi walked into her next trial with her head high. The gavel was still firm in her hand. But her past, it no longer followed her into the room. It had been sentenced. Just like him. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.